Ladies and gentlemen, The View could actually be shut down. The Trump administration just opened a formal FCC investigation into ABC's show, and now Disney is on its knees begging regulators to stamp it a bona fide news program. The only thing standing between that program and a federal equal time violation that could cost them their broadcast license. Brendan Carr asked the country point blank, is The View bona fide news? Come on. And ABC's so terrified they're now begging viewers to flood the FCC and bury the probe. This isn't a fine. This is the kind of ruling that ends a show. So what happens when Carr says no? Quick interruption. If you'd like to support the channel, you can find all the donate links down below. Every contribution helps me keep creating videos consistently, improve the quality of the channel, upgrade my setup, and spend more time researching and producing the best content possible. I truly appreciate every bit of support. Now let's get back to the video.
He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, which he's appealing. The case has a lot of people divided. Some people believe that race was a factor in the trial because there were no black jurors. They were all the three black jurors that were there were educators, and they were released.
They were struck.
They were struck.
Yeah. You're supposed to have a jury of your peers, and you're not supposed to just strike someone because they're black. And in this case, they gave the reasoning that they're educators, and this happened, these were high school students, and this happened at a school track meet, so they couldn't be impartial because of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, The View might finally be in real trouble. And before anybody yells at me, let me set the table, because if you've got zero background here, you need it. The View is the ABC daytime show. 5 women, 1 table, a national audience, broadcast over public airwaves. Lately, they've been chewing on a case out of Texas. A 17-year-old kid named Carmelo Anthony stabbed and killed another 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a high school track meet. 1 boy is dead. The other got handed 35 years and he's appealing. A genuine tragedy. 2 families wrecked forever. Now, there's chatter that the FCC is sniffing around shows like this. Do I know exactly where that lands? I don't. I'm not going to lie to you guys and pretend I've read some secret memo. But here's why this matters to you, to working families, to anybody who still trusts what comes out of their TV. A national program on public airwaves just spent a segment turning a killing into a race grievance. And that's the part we need to walk through. Because watch how they framed the jury. You hear that? The whole opening move is no black jurors, 3 were struck, they were educators, so it must be race. And look, I want to be fair, jury composition matters, it genuinely does. But notice what they did. They skipped right past the reason that was given and went straight to the worst faith version. The kid was a high school student, the struck jurors were high school educators. You don't have to be a lawyer to go, maybe that's a conflict. But on that table, nope, straight to the narrative. And let me actually teach you guys something here, because this is the good stuff. There's a thing in this country called a Batson challenge. Comes from Batson versus Kentucky, 1986 Supreme Court. The whole point of it is you literally cannot strike a juror because of their race. It's illegal. It's been illegal for 40 years. So if a lawyer thinks a juror got bounced for being black, you raise the Batson challenge. The other side has to give a race-neutral reason, and the judge decides if it's legit. So here's what gets me. The system the ladies on The View are screaming about. It already has a built-in fix for exactly the thing they're mad about. The reason given was educators. That's race-neutral on its face. A judge looked at it and bought it. You can disagree, but you can't pretend the safeguard doesn't exist while sitting there as a former prosecutor. And one of them was. She'll tell you herself.
I don't think that's an appropriate reason.
It might be the best ones, too.
Yeah, I don't think it's an appropriate reason to strike black jurors, especially when it's a young black teenager on trial, and especially when that particular area is made up of 10% of an African-American community. So I don't think he got a jury of his peers. So I think on appeal, there is a legitimate thing, a legitimate reason. I also think we have to look at self-defense here, because there seems to be 2 systems of justice at play in this country. And there have been for a very long time. I was part of the system, so I understand that, and I believe that to be true. In this case, this young man, you heard him say, he put his hands on me, and I told him not to. This, the kid that died, and I have so much empathy for him and his family's loss. That kid was 200 pounds. This kid was 130 pounds. And so, and the other kid was also taller.
2 systems of justice. There it is. And I'll give her this. She says it with feeling. She clearly believes it. And I'm not going to mock somebody for caring about a dead kid or a kid going to prison. That's human. But follow the logic because it falls apart in real time. She pivots from the jury was racist to actually it was self-defense, 130 pounds versus 200 pounds. The victim had a twin brother. He feared for his life. Okay, maybe. That's an argument for a courtroom. But you can't argue the trial was rigged and that the same rigged trial somehow got the self-defense question right enough to talk about. Pick one. Which is it? Was the system broken, or are we relitigating the verdict from a couch in Manhattan? You don't get both. And here's the thing, nobody at that table will say out loud, a 17-year-old Austin Metcalf is in the ground. He doesn't get an appeal. He doesn't get rehabilitated at 35. He's just gone.
Than he is. He was the only black kid under the tent. And the victim here had his twin brother with him, who was also a very large person. If you don't fear for your life, if you weigh 130 pounds, I weigh 130 pounds. Facing somebody that's 200 pounds, I would be terrified of that. So I don't understand why self-defense was rejected by this jury.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, especially the jury representation. That's what stood out to me. And we know there's plenty of evidence that there's sentencing disparity with people of color. The one thing to me, though, is what is the fair sentence when you take a life? And this is what I'm struggling with, because this is a tragedy across the board. A 17-year-old is dead. A 17-year-old's going to likely spend 35 years in jail. He could appeal at 17.
Yeah. And now you've got the second host going, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Of course she does. That's the format. Nobody on that show ever says, wait, hang on, back up. It's a feedback loop. One says the jury was unfair, the next nods, the third nods, and the audience at home thinks they just watched a debate. They didn't. They watched 5 people agree with each other and call it journalism. But to her credit, and I mean this, the second one at least wrestles with it. She asked the real question. What is a fair sentence when a kid takes a life? That's an honest struggle. I respect honest struggling. Listen to where she lands.
Because I wrestle with it. If it was, God forbid, anyone in my life, I would think 30 years seems about right. If they said life, I'd say that's too long for a 17-year-old. He could be rehabilitated.
Look, I think 35 years, if there is no self-defense claim, which is an absolute claim to this crime, absolute defense, I think that would be appropriate. But if you look at other cases, there was the other case where there was a young black kid, who was chased by Rick Chow, a store owner, accused of taking water bottles, which he didn't take, the 4 water bottles. He chased that young boy 130 yards, which is half of a football field, and shot him in the back, claiming self-defense. And you know where he is? Well, he had been invited under the tent by a friend.
Yes.
He had been invited. One last thing, I know we're playing the music, but Austin Metcalf's the victim, the deceased. His father went on a podcast, and listen to it for yourself, but he called Carmelo Anthony a racial slur. And he also said that the reason that black people weren't on the jury is because black people are unable to hold bias from the trial because they don't know their own fathers, have a bunch of baby mamas running around living off of government assistance.
True.
So that is the thing. That's the thinking of the victim's father.
Well,
okay, so a couple things. She says if it were someone in her own life, 30 years sounds about right. Life sounds too long for a 17-year-old. And honestly, that's a reasonable human take. I don't hate that. But then we get the bit about the victim's father going on a podcast and allegedly calling the defendant a slur and saying ugly, vile stuff about black families and government assistance. And the table just leaves it hanging there like a microphone drop. Now, I have no idea if the father said any of that. I can't verify it. You can't verify it from a TV table, and I'm not going to repeat a grieving father's alleged words as gospel. But you guys see the move, right? They couldn't quite win the jury argument, couldn't quite win the self-defense argument. So right at the buzzer, they reach for the dad. Make the dead boy's father the villain. That's the play. Smear the family of the kid who's in the ground, because it's easier than admitting a jury of actual human beings heard all the evidence and reached a verdict. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is the whole reason the FCC conversation even exists. Not because anybody's scared of opinions. Have your opinions. But these are the people who lecture